The Xylos space station hung like a gleaming jewel against the backdrop of swirling nebula gases, its multiple rings and spires rotating in perfect synchronization. The station represented the pinnacle of intergalactic cooperation and knowledge exchange, hosting the most prestigious academic institution in the known galaxy, the Xylos Academy of Advanced Sciences. Rylan, a Xanthian with iridescent aquamarine scales and delicate gill slits, swam through the specialized water corridors that connected to the main academic hub. These translucent tunnels allowed aquatic species to navigate the station while observing the activities in the standard atmosphere sections. Today marked the beginning of the new academic cycle, and Rylan was eager to return to class after the brief interstellar break. The fluid in Rylan's corridor shifted direction, guiding him toward the Academy's central hub. As he approached the transition chamber, he mentally prepared for the shift from his comfortable aquatic environment to the standard atmospheric conditions. The specialized bodysuit he wore would keep his scales moisturized while allowing him to function outside of water. It wasn't ideal, but it was the price of interspecies education. As Rylan's gills absorbed the last of the water and his specialized respiratory implant activated, he couldn't help but feel a twinge of pride. Being selected for the Advanced Comparative Physiology course under the renowned Dr. Grok was an honor few second cycle students achieved. The transition complete, Rylan entered the laboratory classroom where several of his classmates had already gathered. The room buzzed with the telepathic whispers of the Lyrans, the clicking mandibles of the Cthar, and the harmonic vibrations of the gaseous Vorpians. Each species had evolved under drastically different conditions, developing unique biological advantages that had helped them dominate their home worlds before joining the Galactic Alliance. "Did you hear?" Cthar clicked his mandibles excitedly, his exoskeleton gleaming under the laboratory lights. "We're getting an Earthling this cycle." "Earth?" Rylan inquired, settling into his adaptive seat. "Isn't that the newly admitted planet from the Sol system?" "Indeed," answered Lyra, her silver eyes gleaming with curiosity as subtle waves of telepathic energy rippled around her translucent form. They were only granted provisional Alliance membership last solar rotation. This will be the first human student at the Academy. "I've heard they're incredibly fragile," Zorp added, demonstrating his species' regenerative abilities by casually detaching and reattaching one of his smaller tentacles. No exoskeleton, no enhanced senses, no natural weapons or defenses. Just soft tissue and brittle calcium supports. "How did they ever achieve space travel?" someone muttered from across the room. The conversation halted as the laboratory doors slid open, revealing the imposing figure of Dr. Grok. The Sirian professor stood nearly 3 meters tall, with mottled gray skin and 4 articulated arms that moved with precise, deliberate motions. His central eye, larger than the 2 peripheral ones, scanned the room with unnerving intensity. "Your attention." Dr. Grok's voice resonated through the chamber, a low frequency that all species present could perceive, regardless of their auditory capabilities. This cycle's Advanced Comparative Physiology will explore the biological adaptations that have allowed sentient species to dominate their evolutionary niches. The professor activated the holographic display at the center of the room, which flickered to life with 3-dimensional representations of various alien anatomies. "Your academic performance will be evaluated based on practical applications of theoretical knowledge, not merely rote memorization of biological facts," Dr. Grok continued, his central eye narrowing. "The universe is unforgiving. Understanding how different physiologies respond to stress, injury, and environmental challenges can mean the difference between survival and extinction." As if on cue, the laboratory doors slid open once more, and all eyes turned to the latecomer. The human stood in the doorway, noticeably shorter than most species present, with no immediately apparent special features. No luminescent skin, no extra limbs, no visible defensive structures, just 2 arms, 2 legs, and a head covered with a patch of dark filaments. His skin tone was a muted brown, unremarkable compared to the vibrant colors and patterns displayed by other species. "Apologies for my tardiness," the human said, his voice surprisingly steady despite being the focus of so much attention. The artificial gravity in Section 7 was recalibrated, and I had to take a detour. Dr. Grok's central eye fixed on the human with undisguised skepticism. "You must be Alexander Ryder, the exchange student from Earth." "Alex, please," the human corrected politely. "You are 17 minutes late, Earth student," Dr. Grok stated flatly. "In the time you wasted, a pyroxian lung parasite could have completed 3 reproductive cycles. I expect punctuality from all students, regardless of their physiological limitations." Several students chittered or vibrated in amusement at the professor's thinly veiled insult. The human's face colored slightly. "Some kind of circulatory response," Rylan noted with curiosity, but he maintained his composure. "Take the empty station next to Rylan," Dr. Grok instructed, gesturing toward the Zanshin with one of his lower arms. As Alex approached, Rylan noticed the subtle sheen of perspiration on the human skin. The station's standard atmospheric settings, while comfortable for most species, must have been challenging for the human's rudimentary temperature regulation system. "Hello," Alex greeted Rylan quietly as he settled into the adaptive seat, which morphed uncomfortably to accommodate his unfamiliar physiology. Rylan acknowledged the greeting with a slight nod, unsure how to interact with this curiosity from a backwater planet. The human appeared even more fragile up close. No protective coverings beyond the simple fabric garments, no visible secondary defense mechanisms, and a concerning reliance on what appeared to be a very inefficient breathing apparatus. "Today," Dr. Grok announced, "we will examine the relationship between evolutionary pressure and physiological adaptation. Each of you represents the pinnacle of evolution on your respective worlds." The professor's central eye fixed momentarily on Alex, and his upper right arm made an almost dismissive gesture. With varying degrees of success, of course. More chittering laughter rippled through the class. Alex remained silent, his expression unreadable to Rylan's unfamiliar eyes. As the lecture proceeded, Dr. Grok called upon various students to demonstrate their species' evolutionary advantages. Thar proudly displayed the incredible strength of his exoskeleton by crushing a dense metal alloy sphere with his mandibles. Lyra demonstrated her species' advanced telepathic abilities by simultaneously perceiving and transmitting the surface thoughts of 3 volunteer students. Zorp detached and regenerated an entire limb in minutes, explaining the cellular mechanisms that made such remarkable healing possible. When it came to Alex's turn, the human seemed momentarily at a loss. "Earth student," Dr. Grok prompted, "please share with the class your species' primary evolutionary advantage." Alex stood, visibly uncomfortable under the scrutiny of so many alien eyes. "Humans don't really have a singular specialized adaptation like many of the species here," he began. "Our advantage is more generalized adaptability." "Specifics," Earth student, Dr. Grok pressed. "What unique physiological feature allows humans to compensate for their obvious deficiencies?" Alex hesitated before answering. "We have exceptional endurance. Humans evolved as persistence hunters, capable of pursuing prey until exhaustion through thermoregulation via sweating and efficient bipedal locomotion." "Impressive." Dr. Grok's tone made it clear he found it anything but. "So your species' greatest achievement is the ability to perspire efficiently and walk on 2 limbs. Truly remarkable." The dismissive laughter that followed caused Alex's face to flush again, but he returned to his seat without further comment. Throughout the remaining class time, Rylan observed the human struggling with tasks the other students found elementary. When asked to rapidly adjust his visual perception to sudden changes in light intensity, Alex blinked painfully and shielded his eyes. During a resistance test, his unprotected skin reddened alarmingly when exposed to mild acidic conditions that wouldn't even register to a Kthar. In a variable gravity chamber, he moved awkwardly and needed to rest frequently, while species adapted to extreme gravitic conditions navigated with ease. By the session's end, The general consensus among the students seemed to be that the human was a curious addition to the class, but hardly worth serious consideration. Rylan overheard Kthar and another student placing bets on whether the Earth student would complete the cycle or withdraw when the real challenges began. One rotation says he's gone by mid-cycle examinations. Kthar clicked confidently. "I'll take that bet," Zorp replied. The academy wouldn't have admitted him if he couldn't at least survive the basic curriculum. As the students filed out, Rylan noticed Alex lingering behind, reviewing the session's materials with intense concentration. Despite his apparent physical limitations and a thinly veiled mockery from the other students, the human showed no signs of discouragement. There was something curious about his quiet determination that Rylan couldn't quite dismiss. Over the following weeks, the pattern continued. Alex routinely arrived late to class, often appearing fatigued. During practical exercises, he was invariably the slowest, weakest, or least efficient, drawing subtle sighs of impatience from Dr. Grok and not-so-subtle mockery from several classmates. Yet Rylan began to notice something that others seemed to miss. While the human lacked the spectacular abilities of his classmates, he approached each challenge with methodical attention to detail. When he failed, which was often, he would analyze the failure, adjust his approach, and try again with subtle variations. His progress was slow but undeniable, and there was a tenacity to his efforts that Rylan found strangely admirable. During one particularly demanding session involving adaptation to toxic environments, Alex was the only student who took extensive notes on every species' response patterns. When Kthar scoffed at this, Alex simply shrugged. "I can't rely on natural immunity like you can," he explained. "I need to understand the mechanisms to compensate." Kthar's mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement or disdain. "Compensate all you want, soft skin. Some deficiencies can't be overcome with notes." "Perhaps," Alex conceded, returning to his observations without visible offense. It was during their third week of class that everything changed. Dr. Grok had arranged a practical laboratory session involving biological samples from the volcanic world Pyrax, including the notoriously dangerous flora that had evolved in its extreme conditions. The specimens were housed in specialized containment fields that allowed students to observe and interact with them under controlled circumstances. Today's exercise will test your ability to analyze unfamiliar biological hazards and respond appropriately, Dr. Grok explained as he distributed the specimen containers. Each team will receive a different Pyraxian sample. Your task is to identify its defense mechanisms and determine potential biological applications. Rylan was paired with Alex, much to his private dismay. While he no longer actively disdained the human, he wasn't eager to be slowed down by his limitations. The specimen they received was a particularly vicious-looking plant with gleaming obsidian thorns that seemed to pulse with an internal heat. Pyraxian firebarb, Rylan identified immediately. The thorns contain a mild neurotoxin that causes intense burning sensations, but is rarely fatal. Alex nodded, examining the plant through the containment field with careful attention. "The thorns appear to be hollow," he observed. "Delivery system for the toxin, I assume." "Correct," Rylan confirmed, somewhat surprised by the human's accurate assessment. "They're also remarkably sharp, capable of penetrating most organic materials." As they worked, documenting the plant's properties, Rylan became aware of a commotion at the station beside theirs. Kthar and his partner, a Volarian named Mex, were arguing over the proper handling procedure for their specimen. "The containment field is stable," Kthar insisted, his mandibles clicking in irritation. "Maximum security protocols are unnecessary for preliminary observation." The manual specifically states. Mex began, but Kthar had already begun adjusting the containment parameters. What happened next occurred with alarming speed. The containment field fluctuated momentarily, perhaps due to Kthar's impatient adjustments, perhaps due to a system malfunction. In that split second, their specimen, a particularly aggressive variant of Pyraxian flora, extended with explosive force, sending dozens of razor-sharp thorns outward like projectiles. Most students were protected by their natural defenses or quick reflexes. Thar's exoskeleton deflected the thorns harmlessly. Zorp simply allowed the thorns to penetrate, knowing his regenerative abilities would expel them shortly. Lyra had sensed the danger microseconds before it occurred and had erected a telekinetic barrier. But Alex, with his lack of natural armor and slower reflexes, was not so fortunate. One of the larger thorns struck him directly, penetrating deep into his forearm. The classroom erupted in chaos. Containment breach, Dr. Grok bellowed, triggering the laboratory's emergency protocols. Remain at your stations. Medical response is en route. Rylan turned to Alex, expecting to find the human collapsed in agony or panic. Instead, to his astonishment, Alex was calmly examining the thorn embedded in his arm. Blood, a startling crimson liquid, flowed freely from the wound, dripping onto the laboratory floor where it formed small, viscous pools. Several students recoiled at the sight. Among most evolved species, internal fluids were carefully contained. Visible bleeding was considered both primitive and distressing. That doesn't look good, Rylan ventured, uncertain how to react to the alarming spectacle. It's not ideal, Alex agreed with surprising composure. He reached for his personal bag, wincing slightly as the movement disturbed the embedded thorn. The medical team might take a while to navigate the emergency protocols. I should remove this and stop the bleeding. You can't be serious, Rylan protested. The thorn contains neurotoxins. Removal requires specialized equipment and medical supervision. Paraxian firebarb toxin is mild for most humanoid species, Alex replied, withdrawing a compact kit from his bag. It causes pain, but it's not life-threatening. The bigger concern is blood loss and potential infection. By now, several other students had gathered around, watching with a mixture of horror and morbid fascination. Even Dr. Grok approached, his 3 eyes widening at the scene. Earth student, the professor interjected. The medical team will arrive in approximately 8 minutes. Your species' primitive circulatory system can sustain blood loss for that duration. With respect, Doctor, Alex responded, already opening his kit to reveal an assortment of compact tools and supplies. I'd prefer not to wait. The thorn is quite deep, and I'd rather not risk additional tissue damage or toxin absorption. Before anyone could object further, Alex gripped the protruding end of the thorn with a small instrument from his kit. With a quick, decisive motion that drew gasps from the observing students, he extracted the entire thorn in one smooth pull. Blood flowed more freely from the now open wound, but Alex seemed entirely unfazed. With methodical efficiency, he cleaned the area with an antiseptic solution, examined the wound's depth and severity, and then reached for something that made Rylan's scales ripple in disbelief. A curved needle and some kind of filament. You're not. Rylan couldn't finish the thought. The wound's too deep for skin adhesive, Alex explained calmly, as if discussing something completely ordinary. It needs sutures. The laboratory had fallen into stunned silence. Even Dr. Grok seemed momentarily at a loss for words as Alex threaded the needle with practiced ease. What followed was simultaneously fascinating and disturbing to the observing aliens. Without anesthetic, without hesitation, Alex began to stitch his own flesh together. The needle punctured his skin repeatedly, drawing the edges of the wound into alignment with each pass of the thread. Tiny droplets of sweat formed on his forehead, the only indication that the procedure might be causing him discomfort, but his hands remained remarkably steady. "This is barbaric," someone whispered, but the comment held a note of reluctant admiration. Rylan couldn't look away. The sight was primitive, even gruesome by the standards of most advanced species, yet there was something undeniably impressive about the human's calm self-sufficiency in the face of injury. As Alex tied off the final suture and began applying a protective dressing to the wound, the medical team finally arrived. The lead medic, a Thalaxian with specialized sensory appendages, scanned the wound with visible surprise. "You've treated yourself," the medic observed, the tendrils around its speech organ rippling in confusion. "Basic field medicine," Alex replied with a small shrug that belied the impressiveness of what he'd just done. The wound was clean and straight. 7 sutures should hold until proper healing begins. The medic's scanning device hovered over the injury. The suture placement is remarkably precise, and you've neutralized most of the toxin with your chemical application. Anti-venom compound, Alex explained. Standard issue in Earth exploration kits. It's designed to break down most common protein-based toxins. After confirming that no further immediate treatment was necessary, the medical team documented the incident and departed. As the class slowly returned to order, Rylan noticed the subtle shift in how the other students regarded Alex. The dismissive glances had been replaced by curious, evaluating looks. Thar, whose actions had inadvertently caused the accident, approached with an awkward mandible gesture that approximated contrition in his species. Your response was unexpected, the insectoid student acknowledged. Most beings would have awaited professional assistance. Where I come from, professional assistance isn't always available, Alex replied without rancor. Self-reliance is a necessary skill. As they left the laboratory that day, Rylan found himself walking alongside Alex. The human moved with a slight favoring of his injured arm, but otherwise showed no ill effect from what, to Rylan, seemed like a traumatic experience. That was impressive, Rylan admitted finally. Most species would consider physically mending their own tissue to be primitive. Alex smiled slightly. Sometimes primitive solutions are the most practical. Technology fails. Systems break down. But basic skills will keep you alive when nothing else will. Rylan considered this, feeling a newfound respect for the strange, soft-skinned alien who had demonstrated such unexpected resilience. Perhaps there was more to humans than their unimpressive exterior suggested. The incident in the laboratory marked a subtle but significant shift in the class dynamics. While Alex was still clearly the least physically imposing student, the casual dismissal had been replaced by a tentative respect. Even Dr. Grok seemed to regard the human with marginally less condescension, occasionally acknowledging his theoretical contributions with something approaching approval. For his part, Alex continued as before, diligent, unassuming, and persistent in the face of challenges that would have deterred many. His wound healed with remarkable speed, leaving only a thin line of slightly darker skin as evidence of the injury. When Zorp inquired about the scar, Alex explained that human skin did regenerate, just more slowly and with visible evidence of the healing process. We keep our battle records on our skin, he said with a hint of humor that some of the aliens didn't quite grasp. 2 weeks after the laboratory incident, the routine of the Xylo station was shattered by a catastrophic event. Rylan would later learn that a micrometeor shower had damaged one of the station's primary power nodes, triggering a cascade of system failures throughout multiple sectors. At the time, however, all he knew was sudden darkness, the disorienting sensation of fluctuating gravity, and the blaring of emergency alerts in multiple frequencies. Their class had been in the midst of a lecture on extremophile adaptations when the emergency protocols activated. The laboratory's auxiliary power maintained minimal life support, but the primary systems, including the specialized environmental controls vital to many species, began to fail. Remain calm, Dr. Grok commanded, his voice pitched to carry over the alerts. The station's automated recovery systems will restore functionality within standard parameters. But the minutes stretched on, and instead of improvement, the situation deteriorated. The laboratory's atmospheric composition began to shift, growing uncomfortably thin for some species and too dense for others. Rylan felt his gill implant struggling to extract sufficient oxygen from the increasingly arid air. Something's wrong with the recovery systems, Lyra announced, her telepathic senses extended. I'm detecting widespread disruption across multiple station sectors. We should evacuate to the emergency shelters, suggested Mex, the Volarian's luminescent spots pulsing with anxiety. Negative, Dr. Grok replied after consulting his personal communication device. Station command reports structural instability in adjoining sections. We are advised to shelter in place until rescue teams can establish safe passage. That pronouncement sent a ripple of unease through the gathered students. Each was suddenly acutely aware of their specialized biological needs and the failing systems designed to support them. The Vorpian students, who required specific atmosphere pressure, were already showing signs of distress, their gaseous forms beginning to lose cohesion. The Cthar, while physically resilient, depended on precise temperature regulation to maintain optimal function. Ryland himself felt the uncomfortable drying of his scales as the humidity levels dropped precipitously. Our immediate priority must be to stabilize the environmental conditions, Dr. Grock stated, though Ryland detected an uncharacteristic note of uncertainty in the professor's voice. The Syrian's specialized knowledge of theoretical biology didn't necessarily translate to practical engineering solutions. It was Alex who stepped forward, surprisingly steady despite the fluctuating gravity. "I have some experience with environmental system maintenance," he said. "On Earth, we train for emergency situations in isolated environments." Dr. Grock's central eye fixed on a human. "Your assistance would be appreciated, Earth student." What followed was a remarkable transformation. The quiet, often struggling human suddenly took charge with calm authority that caught everyone by surprise. He quickly assessed the functioning systems, identified the critical failures, and began organizing the students based on their abilities. "Cthar, your exoskeleton can withstand the pressure differentials in the maintenance crawl space. We need access to the auxiliary atmospheric regulation controls. Lyra, can you extend your perception to the adjacent sections? We need to know if there are any immediate structural threats approaching our position." Without questioning the sudden reversal of hierarchy, the students complied. There was something in Alex's confident demeanor that instilled trust, even among those who had previously dismissed him. Working with scavenged tools and improvised solutions, Alex directed efforts to stabilize their immediate environment. He showed Ryland how to create a rudimentary but effective moisture recirculation system using laboratory equipment, addressing the Xantians' most pressing biological need. For the struggling Vorpians, he devised pressure-stabilized containment fields using repurposed research equipment. "How would you know all this?" Ryland asked as they worked together to modify a cellular analysis chamber into a temporary humidity regulator. "Survival training is standard for all Earth space personnel," Alex explained, his hands moving with practiced efficiency. "Our technology isn't as advanced as many species, so we compensate with comprehensive contingency preparation. Humans have a saying, 2 is 1, and 1 is none. We always plan for systems to fail." Hours passed with no contact from station command or rescue teams. The situation outside their immediate area appeared increasingly dire, based on Lyra's telepathic reconnaissance. Several sections had lost atmospheric containment entirely, and fires had broken out in others. "We cannot remain here indefinitely," Dr. Grock finally acknowledged. "Our supplies are limited, and environmental stabilization is temporary at best. We must attempt to reach the central hub, where emergency resources will be concentrated." The prospect of navigating the damaged station filled many students with dread. Each specialized corridor presented unique challenges for different physiologies, and without functioning guidance systems, the labyrinthine structure of Xylos became a potentially deadly maze. Alex, who had been consulting the station schematics displayed on his personal device, looked up with determination. "We'll need to move as a unified group," he stated. "Each species has vulnerabilities, but together we can compensate for individual weaknesses." What might have once been received as presumption from the supposedly inferior human was now accepted as sensible leadership. Even Dr. Grock deferred to Alex's practical experience. "I propose the following route," Alex continued, displaying a modified path through the station's emergency access ways. "It's longer, but avoids the most severely damaged sections Lyra has identified. We'll need to traverse one zero-gravity section where structural integrity is compromised, but it's our best option for reaching the central hub safely." The journey proved even more harrowing than anticipated. As they left the relative safety of the laboratory, they encountered the full extent of the station's damage. Corridors that should have been pressurized were exposed to vacuum, forcing detours. Emergency barriers had deployed randomly, some protecting vital areas while others simply impeded their progress. Through it all, Alex demonstrated an uncanny ability to improvise solutions to problems that would have stymied even the most advanced technological species. When they encountered a section where radiation levels were dangerously elevated for most species, he fashioned makeshift shielding from materials scavenged along their route. When a structural collapse blocked their planned path, he quickly identified an alternative route through the station's waste reclamation system, an unpleasant but viable option. Most surprisingly to Ryland was the human's physical endurance. Despite being theoretically the most vulnerable member of their group, Alex seemed indefatigable. He assisted struggling students, carried equipment when necessary, and continuously monitored the condition of those with the most pressing biological needs, all while nursing his own recently injured arm. "You should conserve your energy," Ryland suggested after watching Alex help a Vorpian student through a particularly challenging section. "Your species lacks the biological reserves of most others here." Alex smiled grimly. "Humans are endurance predators, remember? We're not particularly strong or fast compared to many species, but we can keep going long after others have exhausted themselves. It's one of our few natural advantages." The most dangerous moment came when they reached the zero-gravity section Alex had identified in their route. A significant portion of the corridor had been compromised, with only the emergency containment field preventing complete atmospheric loss. They would need to navigate across a 20-meter stretch where a single misstep could send them drifting into the jagged debris floating throughout the space. "I cannot maintain telekinetic control for everyone simultaneously in these conditions," Lyra warned, her silver eyes dimming with fatigue. "And my exoskeleton mass makes precision movement in zero-G problematic," Kthar added, clicking his mandibles nervously. Alex surveyed the challenge, his expression thoughtful. "We'll create a tether system," he decided. "Secure anchors at regular intervals using adhesive compounds from the emergency kits. Each person crosses individually while tethered, with those who've already crossed helping to stabilize the next." The system worked remarkably well until they reached the halfway point. Then, as Mex the Valerian was crossing, a section of the damaged wall suddenly collapsed further, sending a shower of debris through the containment field. The disruption caused Mex to lose his grip and drift toward a dangerously jagged section of exposed framework. Without hesitation, Alex, who had been supervising from the far side, launched himself into the zero-gravity space. Using the momentum from his push-off, he intercepted Mex's trajectory, wrapping his arms around the startled Valerian. The action saved Mex, but left Alex himself on a collision course with the debris. In a split-second decision that left the observing students gasping, Alex twisted his body to absorb the impact, protecting Mex from the worst of the collision. The jagged metal tore through Alex's outer garment and into the flesh beneath, drawing another alarming flow of crimson blood that formed perfect spheres in the zero-gravity environment. Despite the obvious pain, Alex maintained his grip on both Mex and a nearby handhold, preventing them from drifting further into danger. With Lyra's telekinetic assistance, they were pulled back to safety, where the extent of Alex's injury became apparent. "You require immediate medical attention," Dr. Grock stated, his tone containing something that might have been concern. "That laceration has penetrated multiple dermal layers." "It's not that bad," Alex insisted, though the pallor of his skin suggested otherwise. "Just need to control the bleeding and keep moving. The central hub isn't far now." Once again, the human's companions watched in astonishment as he treated his own wound, this time a long, jagged cut across his upper back that would have incapacitated many species. With Ryland's assistance, Alex cleaned the wound, applied what he called butterfly closures to hold the edges together, and covered it with a protective dressing. "No sutures this time?" Ryland asked, trying to lighten the mood despite his concern. "Can't reach it properly," Alex admitted with a pained smile. "This will hold until we reach proper medical facilities." Despite his injury, Alex insisted on continuing to lead their group. If anything, the crisis seemed to have focused his resolve. He moved with purpose, made decisions without hesitation, and continually reassured the more anxious students with quiet confidence. They encountered several more obstacles: failing life support systems, collapsed passageways, dangerously unstable sections. But each time, Alex's resourcefulness provided a solution. He demonstrated how to create emergency oxygen supplies from laboratory chemicals, how to assess structural integrity with minimal equipment, how to navigate using analog methods when digital systems failed. After what seemed like an eternity, but was in reality just over 6 hours, they finally reached the central hub of the station. Emergency teams had established control here, with medical facilities, food distribution, and information centers operating at capacity. As they were processed through the emergency protocols, Ryland noticed the looks of astonishment from station personnel when they learned that a class of students and one professor had successfully traversed nearly a kilometer of severely damaged station sections without casualties. "Your group came through Sector 12? One security officer asked incredulously. "We've written that entire section off as non-survivable. Professional rescue teams wouldn't attempt extraction through those corridors." "We had excellent leadership," Dr. Grock stated, his 3 eyes turning toward Alex, who was finally receiving proper medical attention for his injuries. In the days that followed, as the station underwent repairs and normal operations slowly resumed, the story of their harrowing journey spread throughout Xylos. The details grew with each retelling. The impossible obstacles overcome, the innovative solutions improvised, the selfless actions of the supposedly primitive human who had guided a diverse group of aliens to safety. When classes eventually reconvened, the dynamic had shifted permanently. Alex was no longer viewed as the struggling curiosity from a backwater planet, but as a valued member of their academic community. Students who had once dismissed him now sought his insights, particularly on practical applications of theoretical knowledge. Even Dr. Grock's attitude had transformed remarkably. During the first session after the crisis, the Syrian professor addressed the class with uncharacteristic humility. "The recent events have provided a valuable lesson in comparative evolutionary advantages," he began. "I must acknowledge my own error in assessing the adaptive capabilities of certain species based solely on observable physiological traits." His central eye fixed momentarily on Alex, who sat quietly in his usual place beside Ryland. True evolutionary fitness encompasses more than specialized adaptations. The ability to analyze novel challenges, implement creative solutions, and function effectively under non-optimal conditions. These two are survival traits of immeasurable value. The professor then did something unprecedented. He asked Alex to share with the class the principles of human survival methodology that had proven so effective during their crisis. Looking somewhat uncomfortable with the attention, but willing to comply, Alex stood and addressed his classmates. "Humans don't have the natural advantages many of your species possess," he began, "so we've had to develop different strategies. We prepare extensively for worst-case scenarios. We learn basic emergency skills regardless of our specialization. We emphasize adaptability over specialization, and we design redundancy into crucial systems." He paused, considering his next words carefully. "But our most important survival trait isn't individual capability, it's cooperation. Humans are fundamentally social creatures. We survived and evolved not because we were the strongest or fastest predators, but because we work together more effectively than any other species on our planet." Ryland, observing from his seat, realized the profound truth of this statement. During their ordeal, Alex had never attempted to dominate through superior knowledge or skill. Instead, he had coordinated their diverse abilities, recognizing the unique contribution each species could make to their collective survival. In the weeks that followed, the class dynamic continued to evolve. Study groups formed that crossed traditional species boundaries, with students sharing knowledge of their biological specializations. Alex offered a voluntary seminar on basic survival techniques, which proved surprisingly popular among species that had traditionally relied on technology to compensate for environmental challenges. Perhaps most significantly, Thar, who had once placed bets on Alex's early departure from the Academy, approached the human with a formal proposal. The Galactic Alliance Scientific Division is accepting research proposals for the next expedition cycle. The insectoid student explained, mandibles moving in an unusually hesitant pattern. I am forming a team to study adaptive biological responses in extreme environments. Your perspective would be valuable. It was as close to an admission of respect as Cthar's cultural framework allowed, and Alex accepted the offer with appropriate seriousness. As for Rylan, his initial dismissal of the human had evolved into genuine friendship. They often studied together, with Alex demonstrating surprising insight into aquatic adaptations despite his terrestrial origins. In return, Rylan helped Alex navigate the complex social hierarchies of various alien cultures represented at the Academy. On the final day of that academic cycle, as students prepared to disperse for the interstellar break, Dr. Grok made an unprecedented announcement. Based on recent experiences, the Academy curriculum for the next cycle will include a new requirement for all xenobiology students, a course in practical survival methodology. The professor's central eye fixed momentarily on Alex. Earth student Alexander Ryder has agreed to assist in developing the curriculum, bringing valuable perspective from a species that has relied more heavily on adaptability than specialized biological advantages. The announcement was met with murmurs of approval from the assembled students, an acknowledgement that theoretical knowledge alone was insufficient in a universe where systems could fail and technology could falter. As the class dispersed, Rylan lingered behind, waiting for Alex to finish a conversation with Dr. Grok about the proposed curriculum. "Will you return to Earth for the break?" Rylan asked as they finally left the laboratory together. Briefly, Alex replied, absently rubbing the newly healed scar on his forearm, a permanent reminder of his first significant interaction with his alien classmates. "I've been invited to participate in a research expedition to the Cygnus Nebula with Cthar's team. Apparently, my primitive survival techniques might prove useful in the unstable conditions there." Rylan's gill slits fluttered in what had become his approximation of a human smile. "The same Cthar who bet you wouldn't last half a cycle." "The very same," Alex confirmed with a grin. Though he insists he always recognized my non-obvious potential and was merely testing my psychological resilience with his apparent skepticism. They reached the junction where their paths would diverge, Rylan to the aquatic residential sector, Alex to the standard atmosphere quarters. "I've been thinking," Rylan said, somewhat hesitantly, "about what you told the class regarding human survival. Strategies. About cooperation being more important than individual capability." Alex nodded, waiting for him to continue. "On my world, my species evolved to be self-sufficient. Each Xantian is capable of surviving independently, with multiple redundant biological systems. We've always considered this our evolutionary advantage. But during the station crisis, you discovered the limitations of self-sufficiency," Alex suggested. "Precisely. No matter how well-adapted an individual might be, there are situations that require collaborative efforts across different specialties." Alex seemed to consider this carefully before responding. "There's a concept on Earth called humanity that doesn't translate well to other languages. It encompasses more than just our species designation. It refers to something deeper, our capacity for compassion, sacrifice, creativity, and cooperation. Our willingness to help others even at personal cost. Our ability to see past surface differences, to recognize common needs and goals." Rylan absorbed this, finding the concept both foreign and strangely compelling. "Perhaps this humanity is worth studying as much as any biological adaptation." "Perhaps it is," Alex agreed. "And perhaps it's something that transcends species boundaries, a quality that can be found in Xantians, Cthar, Lyrans, and countless others across the galaxy." As they parted ways, Rylan reflected on how dramatically his perception had changed. He had initially seen the human as a curious but inconsequential addition to their academic environment, a fragile creature without impressive biological specializations or obvious evolutionary advantages. Now he understood that strength could take many forms. The ability to calmly stitch one's own wound was impressive, certainly, but it paled in comparison to the deeper resilience the human had demonstrated, the capacity to face limitations without despair, to approach challenges with flexible thinking rather than rigid specialization, and most importantly, to unite diverse individuals toward a common goal. As Rylan entered the familiar comfort of his aquatic chamber, he found himself contemplating not just the biological adaptations that had allowed various species to dominate their home worlds, but the deeper question of what qualities would serve them best as they ventured together into the vast, unpredictable universe beyond. In that broader evolutionary landscape, perhaps the human quality of humanity might prove to be the most valuable adaptation of all. And somewhere on the sprawling Xylos space station, a supposedly fragile human from a newly admitted planet was proving that evolutionary success wasn't always measured in physical strength, natural weapons, or specialized adaptations. Sometimes it was measured in the ability to face adversity with calm determination, to improvise solutions from limited resources, and to bring diverse beings together in common purpose. The universe, with all its challenges, would not be conquered by any single evolutionary advantage, but by the combined strengths of many, working as one. A lesson that had begun with a simple wound, calmly stitched under the astonished eyes of alien classmates who would never again mistake apparent weakness for true vulnerability.